Theme 4: The Central Islamic Lands. As we enter the 21st century, there are over 1 billion Muslims living in all parts of the world. They are citizens of different nations, speak different languages, and dress differently. The processes by which they become Muslims were varied, and so were the circumstances in which they went their separate ways. Yet, the Islamic community has its roots in a more unified past which unfolded roughly 1400 years ago in the Arabian Peninsula. In this chapter, we are going to read about the rise of Islam and its expansion over a vast territory extending from Egypt to Afghanistan. The core area of Islamic civilization from 600 to 1200 in this century's Islamic society exhibited multiple political and cultural patterns. The term Islamic is used here not only in its purely religious sense but also for the overall society and culture historically associated with Islam. In this society, not everything that was happening originated directly from religion, but it took place in a society where Muslims and their faith were recognized as socially dominant. Non-Muslim always formed an integral, if subordinate, part of this society, as did Jews in Christendom. Our understanding of the history of the Central Islamic lands between 600 and 1200 is based on chronicles or Tawariq, which narrates events in order of time, and semi-historical books such as biographies, Sira, records of the saying and doings of the prophets, Hadith, and commentaries on the Quran, Tafsir. The material from which these works were produced was a large collection of eyewitness reports Akbar, transmitted over a period of time, either orally or on paper. The authenticity of each report cover was tested by a critical method which traced the claim of transmission, isnad, and established the reliability of the narrator. Although the method was not foolproof, medieval Muslim writers were more careful in selecting their information and understanding the motives of their informers than were their contemporaries in other parts of the world on controversial issues. They reproduced different versions of the same event as they found in their sources, leaving the touch of judgment to their readers. Their description of event closer to their own times is more systematic and analytical and less of a collection of Akbar. Most of the chronicles and semi-historical works are in Arabic, the best being the Tariq of Tabari, d. 923, which has been translated into English in 38 volumes. Persian chronicles are few, but they are quite detailed in their treatment of Iran and Central Asia. Christian chronicles written in Syriac, a dialect of Aramaic. Aramaic is a language related to Hebrew and Arabic. It has also been used in Ashokan inscriptions. Are fewer, but they throw interesting light on the history of early Islam. Besides chronicles, we have legal texts, geographics, travelogues, and literary works such as stories and poems. Documentary evidence, fragmentary pieces of writing such as official orders or private correspondence is the most valuable of writing histories because it does not consciously refer to events and persons. It comes almost entirely from Greek and Arabic papyrus, good for administrative history, and the Genizer record. Some evidence has emerged from archaeological excavations done at desert places, numismatic study of coins, and epigraphic study of inscriptions, sources which is of great value for economic history, art history, and for establishing names and dates. Proper histories of Islam began to be written in the 19th century by university professors in Germany and the Netherlands. Colonial interest in the Middle East and North Africa encouraged French and British researchers to study Islam as well. Christian priests too paid close attention to the history of Islam and produced some good work, although their interest was mainly to compare Islam with Christianity. The scholars called Orientalists are known for their knowledge of Arabic and Persian and critical analysis of original text. Ignaz Goldziher was a Hungarian Jew who studied at the Islamic College Al-Azhar in Cairo and produced path-breaking studies in German of Islamic law and theology. 20th century historians of Islam have largely followed the interest and method of Orientalists. They have widened the scope of Islamic history by including new topics and by using allied disciplines such as economics, anthropology, and statistics have refined many aspects of Orientalist studies. The historiography of Islam is a good example of how religion can be studied with modern historical method by those who may not share the customs and beliefs of the people they are studying. The rise of Islam in Arabia, faith, community, and politics. During 612 to 32, the Prophet Muhammad preached the worship of a single God, Allah, and the membership of a single community of believers, Ummah. This was the origin of Islam. Muhammad was an Arab by language and culture and a merchant by profession. 6th century Arab culture was largely confined to the Arabian Peninsula and areas of southern Syria and Mesopotamia. The Arabs were divided into tribes, Kabila. Tribes are societies organized on the basis of blood relationships. The Arab tribes were made up of clans or combination of large families. Unrelated clans also merged to make a tribe stronger. Non-Arab individuals, Mawali, became members through the patronage of prominent tribesmen. Even after converting to Islam, the Mawali were never treated as equals by the Arab Muslims and had to pray in separate mosques. Each led by a chief who was chosen partly on the basis of his family connection but more for his personal courage, wisdom, and generosity. Murawa. Each tribe had its own god or goddess who was worshipped as an ideal sanam in a shrine. Many Arab tribes were nomadics, Bedouins moving from dry to green areas, oases of the desert in search of food, mainly dates, and fodder for their camels. Some settled in cities and practiced trade or agriculture. Muhammad's own tribe, Quraysh, lived in Mecca and controlled the main shrine there, a cube-like structure called Kaaba, in which idols were placed. Even tribes outside Mecca considered the Kaaba holy and installed their own idols at their shrine, making annual pilgrimage Haji to the shrine. Mecca was located on the crossroads of a trade route between Yemen and Syria, which further enhanced the city's importance. See map page 82. The Meccan shrine was a sanctuary haram where violence was forbidden and protection given to all visitors. Pilgrimage and commerce gave the nomadic and settled tribes opportunities to communicate with one another and share their beliefs and customs. Although the polytheistic Arabs were vaguely familiar with the notion of a supreme god, Allah, possibly under the influence of the Jewish and Christian tribe living in their midst. Their attachment to idol and shrines was more immediate and stronger. Around 612, Muhammad declared himself to be the messenger, Rasul of God, who had been commanded to preach that Allah alone should be worshipped. The worship involved simple rituals such as daily prayers, salat, and moral principles such as distributing alms and abstaining from theft. Muhammad was to found a community of believers, Ummah, bound by a common set of religious beliefs. The community would bear witnesses, Shahada, to the existence of the region before God as well as before members of other religious communities. Muhammad's message particularly appealed to those Meccan who felt deprived of the grains from trade and religion and were looking for a new community identity. Those who accepted the doctrine were called Muslims. They were promised salvation on the day of judgment, Qiyamah, and share of the resource of the community while on earth. The Muslims soon faced considerable opposition from affluent Meccans who took offense to the rejection of their deities and found the new religion a threat to the status and prosperity of Mecca. In 632, Muhammad was forced to migrate with his followers to Medina. Muhammad's journey from Mecca, Hijrah, was a turning point in the history of Islam, with the year of his arrival in Medina marking the beginning of the Muslim calendar. A 13th century painting from Ajabul Makhlukat depicting the artist's imagination of the Archangel Jibril, who brought message to Muhammad. The first word he spoke was recite Iqra, from which has come the word Quran. In Islamic cosmology, angels are one of the three intelligence forms of life in the universe. The other two were humans and jinns. Islamic calendar. The Hijri era was established during the Caliphate of Umar, with the first year falling in 622 CE. A date in the Hijri calendar is followed by the letter AH. The Hijri year is a lunar year of 354 days, 12 months, Muharram to Dhul Hijjah of 29 or 30 days. Each day begins at sunset and each month with the sighting of the crescent moon. The Hijri year is about 11 days shorter than the solar year. Therefore, none of the Islamic religious festivals, including the Ramadan fast, Eid and Hajj, corresponds in any way to season. There is no easy way to match the dates in the Hijri calendar with the dates in the Gregorian calendar established by Pope Gregory 13 in 1582 CE. One can calculate the rough equivalent between the Islamic age and Gregorian Christian years with the following formula: h into 32 divided by 33 whole plus 622 equal to c minus 622 whole into 33 divided by 32 equal to h. The survival of religion rests on the survival of the community of believer. The community has to be consolidated internally and protected from external dangers. Consolidation from Consolidation and protection requires political institutions such as states and government, which are either inherited from the past, borrowed from outside, or created from scratch. In Medina, Muhammad created a political order from all three sources, which gave his followers the protection they needed as well as resolved the city's ongoing civil strife. The Ummah was converted into a wider community to include polytheists and the Jews of Medina under the political leadership of Muhammad. Muhammad consolidated the faith for his followers by adding and refining rituals such as fasting and ethical principles. The community survived on agriculture and trade as well as an alms tax, zakat. In addition, the Muslim organized expeditionary raids on Meccan caravans and nearby oases. These raids provoked reactions from the Meccan and caused a breach with the Jews of Medina. After pilgrims at the Kaaba, illustration from a 15th century Persian manuscript. A series of battles, Mecca was conquered, and Muhammad's reputation as a religious preacher and political leader spread far and wide. Muhammad now insisted on conversion as the sole criterion for membership of the community. In the harsh condition of the desert, the Arabs attached great value to strength and solidarity. Impressed by Muhammad's achievement, many tribes, mostly Bedouins, joined the community by converting to Islam. Muhammad's alliances began to spread until they embraced the whole of Arabia. Medina became the administrative capital of the emerging Islamic states, with Mecca as its religious center. The Kaaba was cleansed of idols as Muslims were required to face the shrine when offering prayers. In a short space of time, Muhammad was able to unite a large part of Arabia under a new faith community and state. The early Islamic polity, however, remained a federation of Arab tribes and clans for a long time. The Caliphate, expansion, civil wars, and sect formation. After Muhammad's death in 632, no one could legitimately claim to be the next prophet of Islam. As a result, his political authority was transferred to the Ummah, with no established principle of succession. This created opportunities for innovation, but also caused deep divisions among the Muslims. The biggest innovation was the creation of the institution of caliphate, in which the leader of the community, Amir al-Mu'minin, became the deputy Khalifa of the Prophet. The first four caliphs, 632 to 61, justified their power on the basis of their close association with the Prophet and continued his work under the general guidelines he had provided. The twin objectives of the caliphate were to retain control over the tribes constituting the Ummah and to raise resources for the state. Following Muhammad's death, many tribes broke Away from the Islamic State, some even raised their own prophets to establish communities modeled on the Ummah. The first Caliph, Abu Bakr, suppressed the rebels by a series of campaigns. The second Caliph, Umar, accepted the Ummah's policy of expansion of power. The Caliph knew that the Ummah could not be maintained out of the modest income derived from trade and taxes. Realizing that rich booty, ghanima, could be obtained from expeditionary raids, the Caliph and his military commanders mustered their tribal strength to conquer lands belonging to the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Sasanian Empire in the east. At the height of their power, the Byzantine and Sasanian empires ruled vast territories and commanded huge resources to pursue their political and commercial interests in Arabia. The Byzantine Empire promoted Christianity and the Sasanian Empire patronized Zoroastrianism, the ancient religions of Iran. On the eve of the Arab invasions, these two empires had declined in strength due to religious conflicts and revolt by the aristocracy. This made it Map-1 the Islamic lands. Expansion of Islam under Muhammad. Central Islamic lands, say 750. Arabia, Hijaz, Medina, Mecca. Yemen, Aden, Arabian Sea, Red Sea, Adhab, Nile, Africa, Tripoli, Libya, Egypt, Cairo, Fustat, Frankish Empire, Khazar Empire, Italy, Rome, Mediterranean Sea, Byzantine Empire, India, Caspian Sea, Black Sea, Aral Sea, Jaksaret, Sierra Daria, Turkestan, Transoxiana, Bulgaria, Samarkand, Oxus Amur Daria, Marv, Khorasan, Nisapur, Ghazni, Iran, Dalam, Armenia, Tigris, Aleppo, Euphrates, Syria, Damascus, Mapizir, Qasir, Palestine, Kufa, Iraq, Mesopotamia, Sumera, Baghdad, Isfahan, Syrup, Persian Gulf, Alexandria, Jerusalem, Kirwat al-Mafzir, Antioch, Anatolia, Constantinople. Easier for the Arabs to annex territories through wars and treaties. In three successful campaigns, 637 to 642, the Arabs brought Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Egypt under the control of Medina. Military strategies, religious fervor, and the weaknesses of the opposition contributed to the success of the Arabs. Further campaigns were launched by the third caliph, Uthman, to extend the control to Central Asia. Within a decade of the death of Muhammad, the Arab Islamic State controlled the vast territory between the Nile and the Oxus. These lands remain under Muslim rule to this day. In all the conquered provinces, the Caliph imposed a new administrative structure headed by governors, amirs, and tribal chieftains. Ashraf, the central treasury, Beit al-Mal, obtained its revenue from taxes paid by Muslims as well as its share of the booty from raids. The Caliph's soldiers, mostly Bedouins, settled in camp cities at the edge of the desert, such as Kufa and Basra, to remain within reach of their natural habitat. As well as the Caliph's command, the ruling class and soldiers received shares of the booty and monthly payments. Atta. The non-Muslim population retained their right to property and religious practices on payment of taxes, kharaj and jizya. Jews and Christians were declared protected subjects of the state themis and given a large measure of autonomy in the conduct of their communal affairs. Political expansions and unifications did not come easily to the Arab tribesmen. With territorial expansion, the unity of the Ummah became threatened by conflicts over the distribution of resources and offices. The ruling class of the early Islamic State comprised almost entirely the Chorus of Mecca. The third Caliph, Uthman, 644 to 56, also a Chorus, packed his administration with his own men to secure greater control. This further intensified the Meccan character of the state, and the conflict with the other tribesmen opposition in Iraq and Egypt combined with opposition in Medina led to the assassinations of Uthman. With Uthman's death, Ali became the fourth caliph. The rifts among the Muslims deepened after Ali, 656 to 61, fought 2 years against those who represented the Meccan aristocracy. Ali established himself at Kufa and defeated an army led by Muhammad's wife Aisha in the Battle of the Camel, 657. He was, however, not able to suppress the faction led by Muawiyah, a kinsman of Uthman and the governor of Syria. Ali's second battle at Siffin, northern Mesopotamia, ended in a truce which split his followers into two groups. Some remained loyal to him, while others left the camp and came to be known as Kharjis. Soon after, Ali was assassinated by a Kharji in a mosque at Kufa. After his death, his followers paid allegiance to his sons, Hussein and his descendant. Muawiyah made himself the next caliph in 661, founding the Umayyad dynasty, which lasted till 750. After the Civil Wars, it appeared as if Arab domination would disintegrate. There were also signs that the tribal conquerors were adopting the sophisticated culture of their subjects. It was under the Umayyads, a prosperous clan of the Quraysh tribe, that a second round of consolidation took place. The Umayyads and a centralization of polity. The conquest of large territories destroyed the caliphate based in Medina and replaced it with an increasingly authoritarian polity. The Umayyads implemented a series of political measures which consolidated their leadership within the Ummah. The first Umayyad Caliph Muawiyah moved his capital to Damascus and adopted the court ceremonies and administrative institutions of the Byzantine Empire. He also introduced hereditary succession and persuaded the leading Muslim to accept his son as his heir. These innovations were adopted by the Caliph who followed him and allowed the Umayyads to retain power for 90 years and the Abbasids for 2 centuries. The Umayyad state was now as imperial power, no longer based directly on Islam, but on statecraft and the loyalty of Syrian troops. There were Christian advisors in the administration, as well as Zoroastrian scribes and bureaucrats. However, Islam continued to provide legitimacy to their rule. The Umayyads always appealed for unity and suppressed rebellion in the name of Islam. They also retained their Arab social identity. During the reign of Abd al-Malik 685 to 705 and his successors, both the Arabs and Islamic identities were strongly emphasized. Among the measures Abd al-Malik took were the adoption of Arabic as the language of administration and the introduction of an Islamic coinage. The gold dinar and silver dirham and had been circulating in the caliphate were copied of Byzantine and Iranian coins, denarius and drachm, with symbols of crosses and fire altars and Greek and Pahlavi, the language of Iran, inscription. These symbols were removed and the coins now carried Arabic inscription. Abd al-Malik also made a highly visible contribution to the development of an Arab Islamic identity by building the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. The Dome of the Rock, built over a rocky mound by Abd al-Malik, is the earliest major work of Islamic architecture created as a monument to the Muslim presence in the city of Jerusalem. It acquired a mystical association connected with the night journey of the Prophet to heaven, Miraj. Abd al-Malik's coinage reform. The three coin specimens show the transitions from Byzantine to Arab Islamic coinage. On the second coin, the bearded and long-haired caliph is dressed in traditional Arab robes and he is holding a sword. It is the first extant portrait of a Muslim. It is also unique because later there developed an antipathy towards the representations of living beings in art and craft. Abd al-Malik's reform of coinage was linked with his reorganizations of state finances. It proved so successful that for hundreds of years coins were struck according to the pattern and weight of the third specimen. Byzantine golds, solidus denarius aureus, showing the emperor Heraclius and his two sons. Portrayed gold dinar struck by Abd al-Malik with his name and image. The reformed dinar was purely epigraphic. It carries the kalima. There is no God but Allah and He has no partner, sharik. The Abbasid revolution, for their successes in centralizing the Muslim polity, the Umayyads paid a heavy price. A well-organized movement and called Dawa brought down the Umayyads and replaced them with another family of Meccan origin, the Abbasid in 750. The Abbasids portrayed the Umayyad regime an evil and promised a restoration of the original Islam of the Prophet. The revolution led not only to a change of dynasty but changes in the political structure and culture of Islam. The Abbasid uprising broke out in the distant region of Khorasan, eastern Iran, a 20-day journey from Damascus on a first horse. Khorasan had a mixed Arab-Iranian population which could be mobilized for various reasons. The Arab soldiers here were mostly from Iraq and resented the dominance of the Syrian. The civilian Arabs of Khorasan disliked the Umayyad regime for having made promises of tax concessions and privileges which were never fulfilled. As for the Iranian Muslims, Mawali, there, they were exposed to the scorn of the race conscious Arabs and were eager to join any campaign to oust the Umayyads. The Abbasid descendants of Abbas, the Prophet's uncle, mustered the support of the various dissident groups and legitimized their bid for power by promising that a Messiah, Mahdi, from the family of the Prophet al-Bayt would liberate them from the oppressive Umayyad regime. Their army was led by Iranian slave Abu Muslim, who defeated the last Umayyad Caliph Marwan in a battle at the river Chab. Under Abbasid rule, Arab influence declined while the importance of Iranian culture increased. The Abbasids established their capital in Baghdad, near the ruins of the ancient Iranian metropolis. 64. The army and bureaucracy were reorganized on a non-tribal basis to ensure greater participation by Iraq and Khorasan. The Abbasid rulers strengthened the religious status and function of the caliphate and patronized Islamic institutions and scholars, but they were forced by the needs of government and empire to retain the centralized nature of the state. They maintained the magnificent imperial architecture and elaborate court ceremonials of the Umayyads. The regime, which took pride in having brought down the monarchy, found itself compelled to establish it again. The great mosque of Al-Mutawakkil in Samarra, the second Abbasid capital, built in 1850. The minor is 50 meters high and is made of brick inspired by Mesopotamian architectural tradition. This was the largest mosque in the world for centuries. Activity 1. Identify the changing of location of the caliphate's capital. Which would you say was most centrally situated? Comment this. Breakup of the caliphate and the rise of sultanates. Abbasid states became weaker from the 9th century because Baghdad's control over the distant provinces declined and because of conflict between pro-Arab and pro-Iranian faction in the army and bureaucracy. In 810, a civil war broke out between supporters of Amin and Mamun, sons of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, which deepened the factionalisms and created a new power bloc of Turkish slave officers. Mamluk schisms once again competed with Sunni orthodoxy for power. A number of minor dynasties arose, such as the Tahirids and some Samanids in Khorasan and Transoxina, Turan or lands beyond the Oxus, and the Tulunids in Egypt and Syria. Abbasid power was soon limited to central Iraq and western Iran. The too was lost in 945 when the Buyurs, a city clans from the Caspian regions of Iran, Dalam, captured Baghdad. The Buyid rulers assumed various titles, including the ancient Iranian and Shahensas, king of kings, but not that of caliph. They kept the Abbasid caliph as the symbolic head of their Sunni subject. The decision not to abolish the caliphate was a swayed one because another city dynasty, the Fatimids, had ambitions to rule of Islamic world. The Fatimids belonged to the Ismaili sect of Shiism and claimed to be descended from the Prophet's daughter Fatima, and hence the sole rightful rulers of Islam. From their base in North Africa, they conquered Egypt in 969 and established the Fatimid Caliphate, the old capital of Egypt. Fustat was replaced by a new city, Kahira, Cairo, founded on the day of the rise of the planet Mars. Merek, also called Al-Kahir. The two rival dynasties patronized city administrators, poets, and scholars. Between 950 and 1012-200, Islamic society was held together not by a single political order or a single language of culture, Arabic, but by common economic and cultural pattern, unity in the face of political divisions was maintained by the separation between state and society, the development of Persian as a language of Islamic high culture, and the maturity of the dialogue between the intellectual traditions, scholars, artists, and merchants moved freely within the central Islamic lands and assured the circulation of ideas and manners. Some of these also percolated down to the level of villages due to conversion. The Muslim population less than 10% in the Umayyad and early Abbasid periods increased enormously. The identity of Islam as a religion and a cultural system separate from other religions became much sharper, which made conversion possible and meaningful. A third ethnic group were added to the Arabs and Iranian with the rise of the Turkish Sultanate in the 10th and 11th centuries. The Turks were nomadic tribes from the Central Asian steppes, grasslands of Turkestan, northeast of the Aral Sea of to the borders of China, who gradually converted to Islam. Theme 5. They were skilled riders and warriors entered the Abbasid, Samanid, and Buaid administration as slaves and soldiers, rising to high position on account of their loyalty and military abilities. The Ghaznabid Sultanate was established by Alpatej in 961 and consolidated by Mahmud of Ghazni 998 to 1030. Like the Buyids, the Ghaznavids were a military dynasty with a professional army of Turks and Indian. One of the children of Mahmud was an Indian named Tilak, but their center of power was in Khorasan and Afghanistan. And for them, the Abbasid caliphs were not rebels but a source of legitimacy. Mahmud was conscious of being the son of a slave and was especially eager to receive the title of Sultan from the Caliph. The Caliph was willing to support the Sunni Ghaznavid as a counterweight to city power. The Seljuk Turks entered Turan and soldiered in the armies of the Samanids and Quarakanis, non-Muslim Turks from further east. The latter established themselves as a powerful group under the leadership of two brothers, Tughril and Chaghribek. Taking advantage of the chaos following the death of Mahmud of Ghazni, the Seljuks conquered Khorasan in 1037 and made Nishapur an important Perso-Islamic center of learning and the birthplace of Umar Khayyam. Their first capital, the Seljuks next turned their attention to Eastern Persia and Iraq, ruled by the Boers, and in 1055 restored Baghdad to Sunni rule. The Caliph al-Qaim conferred on Tughril the title of Sultan in a move that marked the separation of religious and political authority. The two Seljuk brothers ruled together in accordance with the tribal notion of rule by the family as a whole. Tughril the 1064 was succeeded by his nephew Alp Arsalan. During Alp Arsalan's reign, the Seljuk Empire expanded to Anatolia, modern Turkey. From the 11th to the 13th centuries, there was a series of conflicts between European Christians and the Arab states. This is discussed below. Then, at the start of 13th century, the Muslim world found itself on the verge of a great disaster. This was a threat from the Mongols, the last but most decisive of all nomadic assaults on settled civilization. See Theme 5. The Crusades. The medieval Islamic societies, Christians were regarded as the people of the book, Al-Kitab. Since they had their own scripture, the New Testaments or Injil, Christians were granted safe conduct Aman while venturing into Muslim states as merchants, pilgrims, ambassadors, and travelers. These territories also included those which were once held by the Byzantine Empire, notably the Holy Land of Palestine. Jerusalem was conquered by the Arabs in 638, but it was ever present in the Christian immigration as a place of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. This was an important factor in the formation of the image of Muslims in Christian Europe. Hostility towards the Muslim world became more pronounced in the 11th century. Normans, Hungarians, and some Slavs had been converted to Christianity, and the Muslims alone remained of the main enemy. There was also a change in the social and economic organizations of Western Europe in the 11th century, which contributed in the hostility between Christendom and the Islamic world, and clergy and the various classes. The first two orders, see Theme 6, were making efforts to ensure political stability as well as economic growth based on agriculture and trade. The possibilities of military confrontation between competing feudal principalities and a return to economic organization based on plunder were contained by the Peace of God movement. All military violence was forbidden inside certain areas, near places of worship, during certain periods considered sacred in the church's calendar, and against certain vulnerable social groups such as churchmen and the common people. The peace of God reflected the aggressive tendencies of feudal societies away from the Christian world and toward the enemies of God and build a climate in which fighting against the infidels, non-believers become not only permissible but also commendable. Aleppo, a Hittite, Assyrian, and Hellenistic site which was occupied by the Arabs in 636, it was fought over for the next 1000 years. Note the Crusader scene in action. Nasu al-Batarkis itinerary 1534 to 36. The death in 1092 of Malik Shah, the Seljuk Sultan of Baghdad, was followed by the uh, disintegration of his empire. This offered the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I, Alexius I, a chance to reign Asia Minor and northern Syria for Pope Urban II. This was an opportunity to revive the spirit of Christianity. In 1095, the Pope joined the Byzantine Emperor in calling for a war in the name of God to liberate the Holy Land. Between 1095 and 1291, Western European Christians planned and fought wars against Muslim cities on the coastal plains of the eastern Mediterranean Levant. These wars were later designated as crusades. The Pope ordered the ceremonial granting of crosses to those who had shown to fight. In the First Crusade, 1098 to 99, soldiers from the France and Italy captured Antioch in Syria and claimed Jerusalem. Their victory was accompanied by the slaughters of Muslims and Jews in the city, chronicled by both Christians and Muslims. Muslim writers refer to the arrival of the Christian called Ifringi or Fringi as a Frankish invasion. The Franks quickly established four Crusader states in the region of Syria-Palestine. Collectively, these territories were known as Outremer. The land overseas and later crusades were directed at its defenses and expansion. The Outremer survived well for some time, but when the Turks captured Edessa in 1144, an appeal was made by the Pope for a second crusade, 1145 to 49. A combined German and French army made an attempt to capture Damascus, but they were defeated and forced to return home. After this, there was a gradual erosion of the strength of Outremer. Outremer Crusader Jill gave way to living in luxury and to battles over territory among the Christian rulers. Saladin created an Egypto-Syrian empire and gave the call for jihad or holy war against the Christians and defeated them in 1187. He regained Jerusalem nearly a century after the first crusade. Records of the time indicate that Salah al-Din's treatment of the Christian population was humane, in marked contrast to the way in which Christians had earlier dealt with Muslims and Jews. Although they gave custody of the church of the Holy Sepulchre to the Christians, a number of churches were turned into mosques, and Jerusalem once again became a Muslim city. The loss of the city prompted a third crusade in 1189, but the Crusader gained little except for some coastal town in Palestine and free access to Jerusalem of Christian pilgrims. The Mamluks, the rulers of Egypt, finally drove the crusading Christians from all of Palestine in 1291, Europe gradually lost military interest in Islam and focused on its internal political and cultural development. The Crusade left a lasting impact on two aspects of Christian-Muslim relations. One was the harsh attitude of the Muslim state toward its Christian subject, which resulted from the bitter memories of the conflict as well as the needs for security in areas of mixed population. The other was the greater influences of Italian mercantile communities from Pisa, Genoa, and Venice in the trade between the East and the West even after the restoration of Muslim power. Franks in Syria. The treatment of the subjugated Muslim population differed among the various Frankish lords. The earliest of the Crusaders who settled down in Syria and Palestine were generally more tolerant of the Muslim population than those who came later. In his memories, Usama ibn Munkiyat, a 12th century Syrian Muslim, has something interesting to say about his new neighbors. Among the Franks, there are some who have settled down in this country and associated with Muslims. These are better than the newcomers, but they are exception to the rule and no inference can be drawn from them. Here is an example. Once I sent a man to Antioch on business. At that time, Chief Theodore Sophianos, an Eastern Christian, was there, and he and I were friends. He was then all powerful in Antioch. One day he said to my man, "One of my Frankish friends has invited me. Come with me and see how they live." My man told me, so I went with him and we came to the house of one of the old knights, those who had come with the first Frankish expedition. He had already retired from state and military services and held a property in Antioch from which he lived. He produced a fine table with food both tasty and cleanly served. He saw that I was reluctant to eat and said, "Eat to your heart's content, for I do not eat Frankish food. I have Egyptian women's cooks and eat nothing but what they prepare, nor the swine flesh ever enter my house." So I ate, but with some caution, and we took our leave. A Crusader castle in Syria built during the Crusades. 1110, it was an important base to attack Arab-controlled areas. The tower and aqueducts were built by the Mamluk Sultan Babur when he captured it in 1271. Later, I was walking through the market when suddenly a Frankish woman caught hold of me and began jabbering in their language, and I could not understand what she was saying. A crowd of Franks collected against me, and I was sure that my end had come. Then suddenly that same knight appeared and saw me and came up to the woman and asked her, "What do you want of these Muslims?" She replied, "He killed my brother Horso." This Horso was a knight of Apamea who had been killed by someone from the army of Hama. Then the knight shouted at her and said, "This man is a Bourgeois, that is a merchant. He does not fight or go to war." And he shouted at the crowd and they dispersed. Then he took my hand and went away. So the effect of that meal that I had was to save me from the death. Kitab al-Itibar. Economy, agriculture, urbanizations. and commerce. Agriculture was the principal occupation of the settled population in the newly conquered territories. The Islamic State made no changes in this. Land was owned by big and small peasants, and in some cases by the state. In Iraq and Iran, land existed in fairly large units cultivated by peasants. The state owners collected taxes on behalf of the state during the Sasanians as well as Islamic periods in areas that had moved from a pastoral to a settled agricultural system. Land was the common property of the village. Finally, big estates that were abandoned by their owners after the Islamic conquest were acquired by the state and handed over mainly to the Muslim elites of the empire, particularly members of the Caliph's family. The state had overall control of agricultural land, deriving the bulk of its income from land revenue. Once the conquests were over, the lands conquered by the Arabs that remained in the hands of the owners were subject to a tax, kharaj, which varied from half to a fifth of the produce according to the conditions of cultivation. On land held or cultivated by Muslims, the tax levied was one-tenth ushurs of the produce. When non-Muslims started to convert to Islam to pay lower taxes, this reduced the income of the state. That addresses the shortfall. The caliphs first discouraged conversions and later adopted a uniform policy of taxation. From the 10th century onwards, the state authorized its officials to claim their salaries from agricultural revenues from territories called iqtas, revenue assignment. Agricultural prosperity went hand in hand with political stability. In many areas, especially in the Nile Valley, the state supported irrigation systems, the construction of dams and canals, and the digging of wells often equipped with water wheels or noria, all of which were crucial for good harvest. Islamic law gave tax concessions to people who brought land under cultivation through peasant initiatives and state support. Cultivable and land expanded and productivity rose. Even in the absence of major technological changes, many new crops such as cotton, orange, bananas, watermelon, spinach, and badinjun were grown and even exported to Europe. Grain harvesting. The laborers' lunch in being brought on a tray. Arabic version of the Pseudo-Galen's books of antidotes 1199 with the story of Dr. Galen, page 63. Islamic civilization flourished as the number of cities grew phenomenally. Many new cities were founded mainly to settle Arab soldiers journed who formed the backbone of the local administration. Among this class of garrison cities called Misr, the Arabic name for Egypt were Kufa and Basra in Iraq and Fustat and Cairo in Egypt. Within half a century of its establishment as the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate 800, the population Baghdad had reached around 1 million. Alongside these cities were older towns such as Damascus, Isfahan and Samarkand, which received a new lease of life. Their size and population surged, supported by an expansion in the production of food grains and raw materials such as cotton and sugar for urban manufacturers. A first urban networks developed, linking one town with another and forming a circuit. At the heart of the city were two building complexes radiating cultural and economic power. The congregational mosques, Masjid al-Jami, big enough to be seen from a distance, and the central marketplace Suk, with shops in a row, merchants' lodging, fundak, and the office of the money changer. The cities were homes to administrator ions or eyes of the state, the scholars and merchants, Tujur who lived close to the center. Ordinary citizens and soldiers had their living quarters in the outer circle, each fitted with its own mosque, church, or synagogue, Jewish temple, subsidiary market, and public bath, hammam, and important meeting place. At the outskirts were the houses of the urban poor, a market for green vegetables and fruits brought from the countryside, caravan station, and unclaimed shops such as those dealing in tanning or butchering. Beyond the city walls were in for people to rest when the city guards were shut, and cemeteries. Cemeteries. There were variations on the typology depending on the nature of the landscape, political traditions, and historical events. A boat sailing to Basra, the crew are Indian and the passengers Arab. The transport of goods and passengers by water was cheaper, quicker, and safer in pre-modern time. Illustration from the Makamat written by Hariri, 12th century manuscript. The Makamat assemblies were a genre of popular Arabic literature in which a narrator tells stories of a trickster and his escapes. Political unification and urban demands for foodstuffs and luxuries enlarged the circuit of exchange. Geography favored the Muslim empire, which spread between the trading zones of the Indian Oceans and the Mediterranean for 5 centuries. Arab and Iranian traders monopolized the maritime trade between China, India, and Europe. The trade passed through two major routes, namely the Red Sea and Persian Gulf. The high-value goods suitable for long-distance trade, such as spices, textile, porcelain, and gunpowder, were shipped from India and China to the Red Sea port of Aden and Adhab and the Gulf ports of Sirab and Basra. Activity 2. Describe a morning scene in Basra. Comment this. From here, the merchandise was carried overland in camel caravans to the warehouses. Magazine origin of the World magazine, which has a similar collection of articles of Baghdad, Damascus, and Aleppo of local consumptions of onward transmission. The caravans passing through Mecca got bigger whenever the Haji coincided with the sailing season. Maoism's origin of the world monsoons in the Indian Oceans at the Mediterranean end of these trade routes. Exports to Europe from the port of Alexandria were handled by Jewish merchants, some of whom traded directly with India, as can be seen from the letter preserved in the Geniza collection. However, from the 10th century, the Red Sea route gained greater importance due to the rise of Cairo as a center of commerce and power and growing demand for Eastern goods from the trading cities of Italy. Paper, Geniza, records, and history. In the Central Islamic lands, written works were widely circulated after the introduction of paper. Paper made from linen came from China, where the manufacturing process was closely guarded secret. In 751, the Muslim governor of Samarkand took 20,000 Chinese invaders as prisoners, some of whom were good at making paper. For the next 100 years, Samarkand papers remain an important export item. Since Islam prohibited monopolies, paper began to be manufactured in the rest of the Islamic world by the middle of the 10th century. It had more or less replaced papyrus, the writing materials made from the inner stems of a plant that grew freely in the Nile Valley. Demand for paper increased, and Abd al-Latif, a doctor from Baghdad, see his depiction of the ideal students on page 98, and a resident of Egypt between 100 1093 and 1207 reported how Egyptian peasants robbed graves to obtain mummy wrappings made of linen to sell to paper factories. Paper all facilitated the writing of commercial and personal documents of all kinds. In 1896, a huge collection of medieval Jewish documents was discovered in a sealed room, Geniza, of the Ben Ezra synagogue in Fustat. The documents had been preserved thanks to the Jewish practice of not destroying any piece of writing that contained the name of God. The Geniza was found to contain over a quarter of a million manuscripts and fragments dating back as far as the mid-8th century. Most of the material dated from the 10th to the 13th centuries. That is from the Fatimid, Ayyubid, and early Mamluk periods. This included personal letters between merchants, family and friends, contract promises of dowry, sale documents, laundry list, and other trivia. Most of the documents were written in Judeo-Arabic, a version of Arabic written in Hebrew character that was commonly used by Jewish communities throughout the medieval Mediterranean. The Geniza documents provide rich insights into personal and economic experiences as also into Mediterranean and Islamic culture. The document also suggests that the business skills and commercial techniques of merchants of the medieval Islamic world were more advanced than those of their European counterparts. Goetian wrote a multi-volume history of the Mediterranean from the Geniza record, and Amitabh Ghosh was inspired by a Geniza letter to tell the story of an Indian slave in his book In an Antique Land. Toward the eastern end, caravans of Iranian merchants set out from Baghdad along the Silk Route to China via the oasis cities of Bukhara and Samarkand, Transoxina, to bring Central Asian and Chinese goods, including paper. Transoxina also formed an important link in the commercial network which extended north to Russia and Scandinavia for the exchange of European goods, mainly for and Slavic captives. Hence, the word slave. Islamic coins used for the payments of these goods were found in hoards discovered along the Volga River and in the Baltic region. Male and female Turkish slaves, ghulam, too, were purchased in these markets for the courts of the caliphs and sultans. The fiscal systems, income and expenditure of the state, and market exchange increased the importance of money in the central Islamic lands. Coins of gold, silver, copper, fulus was minted and circulated often in bags sealed by money changer to pay for goods and services. Gold came from Africa, Sudan, and silver from Central Asia. Jefferson Valley precious metals and coins also came from Europe. which used this to pay for its trade with the East. Rising demand for money forced people to release their accumulated reserves and ideal wealth into circulation. Credit combined with currencies to oil the wheels of commerce. The greatest contribution of the Muslim world to medieval economic life was the development of superior methods of payment and business organizations. Letters of credit, SEC, origin of word check. The bills of exchange, Subtaja, were used by merchants and bankers to transfer money from one place to individual to another. The widespread use of commercial paper freed merchants from the need to carry cash everywhere and also made their journeys safer. The caliphs too used the sect to pay salaries or reward poets and minstrels, although it was customary for merchants to set up family businesses or employ slaves to run their affairs. Formal businesses arrangement mujarba were also common in which sleeping partner entrusted capital to traveling merchants and shared profits and losses in an agreed proportion. Slums did not stop people from making money so long as certain prohibitions were respected. For instance, interest-bearing transactions riba were unlawful, although people circumvented usury in ingenious ways. Huel, such as borrowing money in one type of coin and paying in another while disgorging the interest as a commissions on currency exchange, the origin of the bill of exchange. Many tales from the thousands and one nights, Alf Laila wa Laila, give us a picture of medieval Islamic society, featuring characters such as sailors, slaves, merchants, and money changers. Learning and culture. As the religious and social experiences of the Muslims deepened through contact with other people, the community was obliged to reflect one on itself and confront issues pertaining to God and the world. What should be the ideal conduct of a Muslim in public and private? What is the object of creation, and how does one know what God wants from his creatures? How can one understand the mysteries of the universe? Answers to such questions came from learned Muslims who acquired and organized knowledge of different kinds to strengthen the social identity of the community as well as to satisfy their intellectual curiosity. For religious scholars, ulama, knowledge, ilm, derived from the Quran and the model behavior of the Prophet Sunnah, was the only way to know the will of God and provide guidance. In this world, the ulama in medieval times devoted themselves to writing tafsir and documenting Muhammad's authentic hadith. Some went on to prepare a body of laws or Sharia, the straight path to government the relationship of Muslims with God through ritual, ibadat, and with the rest of humanity through social affairs, muamalat. In framing Islamic law, jurists also made use of reasoning quests, since not everything was apparent in the Quran or Hadith, and life had become increasingly complex with urbanization. Differences in the interpretations of the sources and methods of jurisprudence led to the formation of four schools of law, madhab. In the 8th and 9th centuries, they were the Maliki, Hanafi, Safi and Hanbali schools, each named after a leading jurist, faqih, and last being the most conservative. The Sharia provided guidance on all possible legal issues within Sunni society, though it was more precise on questions of personal status, marriage, divorce, and inheritance than on commercial matters or penal and constitutional issues. Courtyard of Mustansiriya Madrasa of Baghdad, founded in 1233. The madrasa was a college of learning for students who had finished their schooling in maktab. Madrasas were attached to mosques, but being madrasas had a mosque attached to them. The Quran. And if all the trees on earth were pens, and the oceans were ink, with seven oceans behind it to add to its supply, yet would not the words of Allah be exhausted in the writing? Quran, chapter 31, verse 27. Page from Quran, written on vellum in the 19th century. It is the beginning of Surah 18, Al-Kahf, the cave, which refers to Moses. The angular Kufi script has vowel sign in red for the correct pronunciation of the language. The Quran is a book in Arabic divided into 114 chapters, surahs, and arranged in descending orders of length, the shortest being the last. The only exception to this is the first surah, which is a short prayer, Al-Fatiha, or opening. According to Muslim tradition, the Quran is a collection of messages, revelation, which God sends to the Prophet Muhammad between 610 and 632, first in Mecca and then in Medina. The task of compiling this revelation was completed sometime in 650. The world is complete. Quran, we have two-date dates from the 19th century. There are many fragments which are older, the earliest being the verse engraved on the dome of the rock and on coins in the 7th century. The use of the Quran as a source material for history of early Islam has posed some problems. The first is that it is a scripture, a text vested with religious authority. Theologians generally believe that as a speech of God, Kalam, Allah, it has to be understood literally, but rationalists among them gave wider interpretations to the Quran. In 833, the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun imposed the view in a trial of faith or Miana that the Quran is God's creation rather than his speech. The second problem is that the Quran very often speaks in metaphors, and unlike the Old Testament, Tawrith, it does not narrate events but only refers to them. Medieval Islamic scholars thus had to make sense of many verses with the help of hadith. Many hadith were written to help the reading of the Quran. Before it took its final form, the Sharia was adjusted to take into account the customary laws of the various regions, as well as the laws of the state on political and social order. Siyasa Sharia customary laws, however, retained their strength in large part of their countryside and continue to bypass the Sharia in matters such as the inheritance of land by daughters. In most regimes, the rulers or his official dealt routinely with matters of state security and sent only selected cases to the Qazi judge. The Qazi appointed by the state in each city or local offend acted as an arbitrator in disputes rather than as a strict enforcer of the Sharia. A group of religious-minded people in medieval Islam known as Sufis sought a deeper and more personal knowledge of God through asceticism, Rabbaniya and mysticism. The more society gave itself up to material pursuits and pleasures and more the Sufis sought to renounce the world truth and rely on God alone. The Tawakkul in the 8th and 9th century, ascetic inclinations were elevated to the higher stage of mysticism. The south by the ideas of pantheism and love. Pantheism is the idea of oneness of God and His creation, which implies that the human soul must be united with its Maker. Unity with God can be achieved through an intense love for God, Ishq, with the woman saint Rabia of Basra, d. 891, preached in her poems. Bayazid Bistami, d. 874, an Iranian Sufi, was the first to teach the importance of submerging the self fauna in God. Sufis used mystical concert sama to induce ecstasy and stimulate emotions of love and passions. Sufism is open to all, regardless of religious affiliation, status, and gender. Dhulnam Misri, d. 861, whose grave can still be seen near the pyramids in Egypt, declared before the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutawakkil al-Mutawakkil that he learned true Islam from an old woman and true chivalry from a water carrier by making religious religion more personal and less institutional. Sufism gained popularity and posed a challenge to Orthodox Islam, and alternative visions of God and the universe was developed by Islamic philosophers and scientists under the influence of Greek philosophy and science. During the 17th century, remnants of late Greek culture could still painting of whirling devices, Iranian manuscript 1490 of the four men dancing, only one is shown with his hand in the correct position. With his hand, some have succumbed to vertigo and are being led away. Be found in the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, although they were slowly dying in the schools of Alexandria, Syria, and Mesopotamia, once part of Alexander's empire. Greek philosophy, mathematics, and medicine were taught along with other subjects. The Umayyad and Abbasid caliphs commissioned the translation of Greek and Syriac books into Arabic book by Christian soldiers. The translation became a well-organized activity under Al-Mamun, who supported the Library Kam Institute of Science Bayat al-Hikmah in Baghdad, where the scholars worked. The works of Aristotle, the elements of Euclid's and Ptolemy's, and Almagest were brought to the attention of Arabic reading scholars. Indian works on astronomy, mathematics, and medicine were also translated. into Arabic during the same period. These works reached Europe and kindled interest in philosophy and science. Activity 3. Comment on this passage. Would it be relevant to a student today? Comment this. The Activity 3. Comment on the passage. Would it be relevant to a student today? Comment this. The idea students. Abd al-Latif, a 12th century legal and medical scholar of Baghdad, talks to his idea students. I commend you not to learn your sciences from the books unaided, even though you may trust your ability to understand. Resort to teachers of each science and you seek to acquire. And should your teacher be limited in his knowledge, take all that he can offer until you find another more accomplished than he. You must venerate and respect him when you read a book. Make every effort to learn it by heart and master its meaning. Imagine the book to have disappeared and that you can dispense with it. Unaffected by its loss, one should read. His stories, study biographies, and the experiences of nations. By doing this, it will be as though in his short life spaces he lived contemporaneously with people of the past, was an intimate storm with them, and knew the good and bad among them. We should model your conduct on that of the early Muslims. Therefore, read the biography of the Prophet and follow in his footsteps. The should frequently distress Therefore, read the biography of the Prophet and follow in his footsteps. You should frequently distrust your nature rather than have a good opinion of it. Submit your thoughts to men of learning and their works, proceeding with caution and avoiding haste. He who has not endured the stress of study will not taste the joy of knowledge. When you have finished your study and reflection, occupy your tongue with the mention of God's name and sing his praises. Do not complain if the world turns its back on you. Know that learning leaves a trail and a scent predoming. He who has not endured the stress of study will not taste the joy of knowledge. When you have finished your study and reflection, occupy your tongue with the mention of God's name. Do not complain God's name and sing his praise. Do not complain if the world turns its back on you. Know that learning leaves a trail and a scent proclaim his possessor a ray of light and brightness shining on him, pointing him out. Ahmad ibn al Qasim ibn Ali Usaiba, Urain al Anba. The study of new objects subjects promoted critical inquiry and had a profound influence on Islamic intellectual life. Scholars with a theological bent of mind, such as the group known as Mu'tazila, used Greek logic and methods of reasoning, kalam, to defend Islamic beliefs. Philosopher, falasifa posed wider questions and provided fresh answer. Ibn Sima, 980 to 1037, doctor by profession and a philosopher, but did not believe in the resurrection of the body and the A doctor by profession and a philosopher did not believe in the resurrection of the body on the day of judgment. This was met with strong opposition from theologians. His medical writings were widely read. The most influential was Al Qanun fil Tib, Canon of Medicine, a million-word manuscript, the list 760 drugs sold by the pharmacist of his day, and includes notes on his own experiment conducted in hospitals. Bimari Stones, the canon points out the importance of dietetics healing through dietary regulation, the influences of the climate and environment on health and contagious natures of some diseases. The canon was used as a textbook in Europe, where the author was the poet was known as Avicenna, System 7. Just before his death, the scientist and poor Omar Khayyam was said to be reading the canon. His gold toothpick was found between two pages of the chapter on metaphysics. In medieval Islamic societies, the fine language and a creative imagination were among the most appreciated qualities in a person. These qualities raised a person communication to the level of adab, a term which implied literary and cultural refinement. Adab forms of expression terms which implied literary and cultural refinement. Other forms of expression include poetry, nazam or orderly arrangement, and prose, nathar or scattered word, which were meant to be memorized and used when the occasions arose. The most people poetic composition of pre-Islamic origin was the Ode Qasida, developed by poet of Abbasid period up to glory, and the achievement of their patrons, poets of Persian origin, realized poet of Persian origin revitalized and reinvented Arabic poetry and challenged the cultural hegemony of the Arabs. Abu Nuwas d. 815, who was the Persian origin, broke new ground by comprising classical poetry on new themes such as wine and male love, with the intention for celebrating pleasures forbidden by Islam. After Abu Nuwas, the poets address the object of their passions in the masculine, even if the latter was a After Abu Nuwas, the poets address the object of their passions in the masculine, if the latter was a woman. Following the same tradition, the Sufis glorify the intoxication caused by the wine of mystical love. By the time the Arabs conquered Iran, Pahlavi, the language of the sacred books of ancient Iran, was in decay. A version of Pahlavi Karnoon, a new Persian with a huge Arabic vocabulary, soon developed the formation of sultanates in Khurasan and Transoxiana took new Persian to great cultural height. The Samanid court poet Rudaki, d. 940, was considered the father of new Persian poetry, which included new forms such as the short lyrical poem Ghazal and the quatrain Rubai, plural. Rubai plural, Rubaiyat, the Rubel. Rubai is a four-line stanza in which the first two lines set the stage, the third is finely poised, and the fourth delivers the point. In contrast to its poem, the subject matter of the Rubai is unrestricted. It can be used to express the beauty of a beloved face. A patron or express the thought of the philosopher. The Rubai reached in zenith in the hands of Umar Khayyam 1048-1131, also an astronomer and mathematician, who lived at various times in Bukhara, Samarkand, and Isfahan. All the beginning of the 11th century, Ghazni became the center of Persian literary life. Poets were naturally attracted by the brilliance of the imperial court rulers, who realized the importance of patronizing art and learning for enhancing their prestige. Mahmud of Ghazni gathered around him a group of poets who composed anthology divans and epic poetry. Mathnavi, the most understanding, was Firdausi, d. 1020, who took 30 years to complete the Shahnama, Books of Kings, and epic of 50,000 couplets, which has become a masterpiece of Islamic literature. The Shahnama is a collection of tradition and legend, the most popular being that of Rustam, which poetically depicts Iran from creation up until the Arab conquest. It was in keeping with the Ghaznavi tradition that Persian later became the language of administration and culture in India. Dimma is talking to the lion asked in this miniature painting of a 13th century Arabic. The Catalog Kitab al-Firisi of a Baghdad bookseller, Ibn Nadim, d. 895, describes a large number of works written in prose for the moral education and amusement of readers. The oldest of this is a collection of animal fables called Kalila wa Dimma, the names of the two jackals who were fables called Kalia wa Dimma, the names of the two jackals who were the leading characters, which is the Arabic translation of a Pahlavi versions of the Panchatantra. The most widespread and lasting literary works are the stories of the hero adventurers such as Alexander al-Iskandar and Sinbad, or those of unhappy lovers such as Kaif, known as Majnun or a madman. These have developed over the centuries into oral and written tradition. That Those and One Night is another collection of the Thousands and One Nights is another collection of stories told by a single narrator, Sarjad, to her husband night after night. The collection was originally in Indo-Persian and was Sarjad to her husband night after night. The collection was originally in Indo-Persian, was translated translated into Arabic in Baghdad in the 8th century. More stories were leaked More stories were later added in Cairo during the Mamluk period. These stories were later added in Cairo during the Mamluk period. 3. These stories depict human beings of different types: the generous, the stupid, the gullible, the crafty, and were told to enhance from the these stories depict human beings of different types: the generous, the stupid, the gullible, the crafty, and were told to be to educate and entertain. In his Kitab al-Bukhala, book of Mr. Jahib of Basra, d. 868, collected amusing anecdotes about minister and also analyzed grit. From the 19th century, from the 9th century onward, the scope of adab was expanded to include biographic manuals of ethics, akhlaq, mirrors of princes, books on starcraft, and above all, history, tariq, and geography. The tradition of history writing was well established in literature. Muslim society history books are read by scholars and students as well as by the broader literature public. For rulers and officials, history provided a good record of the glories and achievement of a dynasty as well as an example of the techniques of administration. In the two major historical works, Ansab al-Asraf genealogies of the Notes of Baladhuri, day 892, and Tariq al-Rasul al-Muluk, history of prophets and kings of Tabari, the home of human history, was treated with the Islamic pure at the focal point. The tradition of local history writing developed with the breakup of the caliphate. Books were written in Persian about dynasties, cities, and regions to explore the unity and variety of the world of Islam. Geography and travel really constitute a special branch of adab. These combine knowledge from Greek, Iranian, and Indian books with the observation of merchants and travelers. In mathematical geography, the inhabited world was divided into seven climes, singular acclaim, parallel with the equator, corresponding to our three continents. The exact position of each city was determined automatically. Muqaddasis D1000 Descriptive Geography Awsan Al-Taqasim. The best divisions is a comparative study of the countries and peoples of the world and the treasure trove of exotic curiosities. Geography and general history were combined in Muraj al-Dhanab, Golden Meadows of Masudi, written in 943 to illustrate the wide variety of worldly cultures. Al-Biruni's famous Tawqiq Ma Lil Hind, History of India, was the greatest attempt by an 11th century Muslim writer to look beyond the world of Islam and observe what was of value in another cultural tradition. By the 10th century, an Islamic world had emerged which was easily recognizable by traveler. Religious buildings were the greatest external symbol of the world. Mosques, shrines, and tombs from the Spain to Central Asia showed the same basic reason. Arcs, domes, minarets, and open courtyards and express the spiritual and practical needs of Muslims in the first Islamic country century. The most acquired a distinct architectural form, roof supported by pillars, which transcend regional variation. The mosques had open courtyards shown where a fountain open courtyard sun where a fountain or pond was placed, leading to a vaulted hall which could accommodate long lines of worshippers and the prayers leader imam. Two special features were located: mosaic floor in the bathhouse of the palace at Kirbad al-Makfur, Palestine, 8th century. Imagine an caliph enthroned on the tree. The scene below depicts peace and exile. The Islamic decorative genius found full expression in the art of metal objects that were among the best prescribed specimens. The mosque lamp from 14th century Syria has the light verse inscribed on it. God is the light, knower of the heavens and the earth. His light is like a niche mesquite with a lamp misbah. The lamp is in a glass which look as if it were a glittering star kindled from a blessed olive Jaitun tree that is neither eastern nor western, whose oil would always shine even if no fire nor touched it. Quran chapter 24 verse 35. Inside the hall a niche mihrab in the wall indicating the direction of Mecca Qibla and the pulpit minbar pronounced mimbar from where sermons were delivered during noon prayer on Friday. Attached to the building was a minaret, a tower used to call the faithful to prayer at the appointment times and to symbolize the presence of the new faith. Time was marked in cities and villages by the five daily prayers and weekly sermons. The same pattern of construction or building built around a central courtyard of I-1 appeared not only in mosques and mausoleums but also in caravanserais, hospitals and places. The Umayyad built desert places in oases such as Khirbat, al-Maftir in Palestine and Qasir Amra in Jordan, which served as luxurious residence and retreats for hunting and pleasures. The places model and Roman and Sasanian architecture were lavishly decorated with sculpture, mosaics, and paintings of people. The Abbasids built a new imperial city in Samarra amidst gardens and running waters, which is mentioned in the stories and legend revolving around Harun al-Rashid. The great places of the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad or the Fatimids in Cairo have disappeared, leaving only traces in literary text. The rejection of representing living beings in the religious arts of Islam promoted two art forms, calligraphy, khattati, or the art of beautiful writing, and arabesque, geometric, and vegetal design. Small and big inscription, usually of religious quotation, were used to decorate agriculture. Calligraphic art has been best preserved in manuscript of the Quran dating from the 8th and 9th century. Literary works such as the Kitab al-Aghni, Book of Songs, Kalila wa Dimma, and Muqammat of Hariri were illustrated with miniature painting. Was illustrated with a miniature painting. Addition of wide variety of illumination technique introduced the enhanced the beauty of the book. Plants and floral design based on the design idea of the garden were used in buildings and book illustration. The history of the Central Islamic lands bring together three important aspects of human civilizations, religions, community, and politics. We can see them as three circles which merge and appear as one of the 7th century. In the next 5 centuries, The circle separate towards the end of our period. The influences of Islam over state and government was minimal, and politics involves. In the next 5 centuries, in circles separate toward the end of our period, the influences of Islam over state and government was minimal, and politics involved many things which had no sanction in religion, kingship, civil wars, etc. The circles of religion and community overlapped. The Muslim community was united in its observance of the Sharia and rituals and personal matters. It was no more governing itself. Policies were a separate circle, but it was defining its religious identity. The only way the circles of religion and community could have separated was through the progressive secularization of Muslim society. Philosophers and Peace advocated this, suggesting the civil society should be made autonomous and rituals be replaced by private spirituality. Activity 4. Which of the pictures in the chapter do you like best and why? Comment this. 595. Muhammad marries Khadija. A wealthy Meccan trader who later supported Islam. 610 to 12. Muhammad has a first revelation, first public preaching of Islam. 612. 621. First agreement of Aqaba with Medinian converts. 622. Migration from Mecca to Medina. Arab tribes of Medina answer shelter Meccan migrants. 622. Migration from Mecca to Medina. Arab tribes of Medina answer shelter Meccan migrants Muhajir. 632 to 61. Early caliphates, conquest of Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Egypt, civil wars. 661 to 750. Umayyad rules, Damascus becomes the capital. 750 to 945. Abbasid rules, Baghdad becomes the capital. Abbasid rule, Baghdad becomes the capital. 945. Boers capture Baghdad, literary and cultural apportions. 1600 1063 to 92. Rule of Nizamul Mulk, the power Seljuk Wakir, who established a string of madness called Nizamiya, killed by Hoshishayan assassins. 1995 to 1291. Crusade contacts between Muslim and Christians. 1100. Death of Ghazouil and Persian Iranian scholars who opposed rationalisms. 1258. Mongols captures Baghdad. Exercise. Answer in brief. Comment this. Answer in a short essay. Answer in a short essay. Comment this.